Well, joining us right now on the phone is Congressman DeSantis from Florida, who has really taken a lead role here, folks, on this issue we've been talking about all day, which is this Palestinian-Hamas alliance. Congressman, you have put forward or called for legislation to deal directly with what we think is a very, very troubling development. What are first of all, your take on the situation with Hamas and Fatah doing this coalition?
Well, I obviously think it's very negative in terms of the peace and security in the region. In some ways, though, it is a clarifying moment. I mean, Hamas makes no bones about what they want. They want the destruction of the Jewish state. The Fatah has said, well, they won't say Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state, but they claim they want peace or whatnot. And so I think that by this alliance, provides a little more clarity on where people like Mahmoud Abbas are coming, through all this process that kind of some of these international actors, including our Secretary of State, has forced upon Israel. Abbas to this day has never been able to say that he believes Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state. And so for me, if we can't even get to that point, then I don't think this is in America's interest to be pursuing, and certainly not in Israel's security interest. So my bill, Palestinian Accountability Act, is to try to bring accountability and truth into the money that American taxpayers send over to the Palestinian Authority. And so what we do is we're trying to condition the funding on actually promoting better behavior. So you got to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. You got to forthrightly and clearly denounce terrorism, and you got to cut ties with Hamas. So they've actually gone in the other direction. And so I just don't think the American people want to be sending money over there if that's going to be used to further this alliance that is so hostile and antagonistic to Israel. And that's the thing, Jay. When people talk about our support for Israel, there's broad support amongst the American people.
No doubt about that. And we're certainly hearing from people already as we've just launched this campaign to back your legislation and others that are being put forward. Let's talk about the situation. We have an office in Jerusalem. When the information came to our team in our office in Jerusalem about this serious unity government, they're on a 5-week path to a complete reconciliation. They've announced that they will reunite with Hamas, which ends basically a 7-year split. The agreement will, basically make the Hamas the partner. I'm holding in my hand, Congressman, the Covenant of the Islamic Resistance Movement. This is Hamas's Covenant 1988, which calls for the complete annihilation of the state of Israel as a Jewish state. They'll say Israel has a right to exist, but not as a Jewish state, although they don't even go that far. But Fatah has said that. Your sense on why now? Why did, with the supposed talks that were taking place and all the pressure that the Obama administration was putting on and have been putting on the Israelis, why did Hamas and Fatah, specifically Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, make this decision right at this particular strategic time?
Well, I think he's responding to the broad sense amongst his folks. And the fact of the matter is, I think that you've never seen a critical mass of Palestinians want to embrace a future where they would coexist with a Jewish state. I think that's unfortunate, but I think that's a reality. And so he is, I just think that he's moving in the direction of Hamas is probably more reflective of where his people are, unfortunately, than were he to go and actually start to say that he's committed to a two-state solution where you have a Jewish state. And that's just the bottom line.
How does our government expect Israel to negotiate with Fatah or Mahmoud Abbas with this Hamas alignment going on? It's an impossible task.
I agree 100%. And I think Prime Minister Netanyahu was correct when he said, look, the peace process stops if you expect us to negotiate with an entity, Hamas, whose main purpose is our destruction. And so from their perspective, look, you actually may be able to come to an agreement with Hamas, but it would simply be Hamas would see that as a stepping stone towards Israel's destruction. So you would never be able to get an agreement that's in Israel's interest. So I think that we absolutely need to stop pressuring Netanyahu and the Israeli government. And I think we also in Congress need to speak out against the Secretary of State's insinuation, John Kerry, that somehow if Israel does not continue to negotiate, that they run the risk of becoming an apartheid state.
Yeah, that was the first time that our government has ever used the phrase apartheid in an official capacity with regard to Israel, which is, of course, the phrase that a lot of Israel's critics will level at the Israeli government and the Israeli people. It's an interesting dynamic that all this is going on at the same time the Hamas-Fatah alignment goes. Congressman, how much money are we talking about here going from the United States taxpayer to the Palestinian Authority? Are we talking hundreds of millions?
It has been over the course of the last 20 years. And look, if you're going to use foreign aid as an instrument of national security, which there are times when you do that, you need to start seeing some results. And I think that this alliance has showed that money has not been successful in terms of moving Palestinians towards a less belligerent stance towards Israel.
An interesting statement you made I want to go back to earlier on, and that is your concern is that Mahmoud Abbas's move is reflective of the Palestinian people. That means even the people in his portion of the West Bank, where he really has his highest level of control. Although the last time I was there, there was a lot more support evident for Hamas in that region than had been before. But your sense is that he's getting internal pressure here.
Well, that's really the only thing that makes any sense. I mean, if his folks were really wanting to pursue a peaceful resolution of this, then I think Israelis have been over backwards over the years, and I think many people in Israel are willing to accept compromises that me personally I probably wouldn't accept if I were there. So the will is there on the Israeli side, and so for him to take this action, that's just what I see. And of course, my legislation actually deals with some of the things with the UNRWA, the United Nations Refugee, and if you look at some of the toxic stuff that gets spewed out through that and some of these other entities in the Palestinian Authority, I mean, you could see why some of these folks identify with Hamas, because they're told time and time again to hate Israel, that Israel is the bane of everyone's existence, and so we do need to realize we have certain tools, but also those folks in that region, if they're going to continue with this cycle of hatred, it's going to be very difficult to ever have a peaceful resolution.
Do you sense, and this is a kind of I guess the point where we're at right now, that this is a situation where really there's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube, so to speak, that by making the statement publicly, Mahmoud Abbas has chosen the path upon which he's going down, and that is he's doing the unity with Hamas because of his own internal pressure, and that basically ends a real solution based on two states living side by side in mutual security.
I think absolutely, without question, and not only just from looking at what's happened recently, but we obviously have a long history of Palestinians and Arabs having an opportunity to have a state from 100 years ago to the UN partition, and they've always tended to reject that. Going with Hamas tells me that there's more of a distaste for having a Jewish state than there is a desire to have a Palestinian state. And I just think that that's unfortunate, but I think it is the case.
Congressman, thanks for being with us, and thank you for taking a lead on this.
Hey, thanks for having me.